All right, we have the Area Man Lives team here. We have Mike Perrotto, uh, Ryan Green, and Amy Green. And then moderating, oh, sorry. And then moderating remotely is going to be Kha'tie Postma. And I will let them get things started.
Yay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I love seeing thumbs up. And are we online on Twitch too? Maybe. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the Area Man Lives panel. I just want to make sure that things are live on Twitch because sometimes we go there without audio, but I know Dan, you'll yell if it's not working. First of all, I want to do a huge welcome to Amy and Ryan and Mike to Mysterium. This is the first Mysterium you've been to, so welcome to Mysterium. Thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know, the Greens and Mike live pretty close by, I think an hour away or so. So it was awesome to have Mysterium right in their backyard so we could finally get them to Mysterium Live to do a panel about their latest game, which happens to also be a Cyan Ventures game. What I'm going to do is I want each of you in turn to introduce yourself, give a little introduction, and tell how you are related to each other and what you do for work together and what each one of you does at Numinous Games. So Amy, why don't you start?
Okay. I am Amy Green, and this guy's my husband, and that guy's been my husband's best friend since they were like 13. So we went to high school together. We all did theater together and just kind of all hung around the same town and started making video games over a decade ago, 12 to 15 years ago.
Well, Mike and I first started making video games together like 25 years ago on the Pentium, on the family Pentium. So.
Oh. That's true. So yeah, for Numinous Games, I'm a director and narrative designer and writer.
I'm Ryan. I am a programmer and an artist, or wannabe, and let's see, what else?
The boss.
Oh yeah, I help run Numinous Games with Josh, my business partner, and he lives in Iowa. We're a remote studio. And we've been going since 2012.
And I am Mike. Like they said, we've been friends since high school. We've acted together. We have gone on double dates together. We were in each other's weddings. So we've known each other for a very long time. I'm a developer and producer at Numinous Games and primarily was working on Area Man Lives.
Thank you all. So for those of you who also don't know, Numinous Games became world renowned for their internationally acclaimed game, That Dragon Cancer, which was a unique and deeply feeling and personal game. I feel like it has encouraged hundreds, if not more, other small game developers to make experiential games with more authentic and personal aspects to them. So thank you all for that. I know I've talked to each one of you about that game a few times, but it's an awesome, incredible experience. If you haven't experienced it and you want to know more about the Greens, please do. But most recently, they just put out, and congrats for launching your game, Area Man Lives. Congrats on that. That's a huge accomplishment, obviously, with Cyan Ventures. Just curious, has anyone in the room actually played Area Man Lives yet? I can't see. Are there anybody? Okay. If not, you'll want to check that out. It's near and dear to Cyan's heart, and it's a virtual experience that is pretty unique and compelling. So can you, I'm not sure who wants to answer first, but can you guys tell us how you first got into games and why you wanted to get into games, and how have you evolved as a team and as developers since your very first games? Ryan, why don't you start?
Okay. I think video games were the perfect intersection of my interest in art and computers. And so when we were teenagers, we were constantly experimenting with that and making QBasic games and stuff like that. But then we went the route of just like, web designers, because it was the .com boom. And it wasn't until like really the iPhone came out that I started looking back into what it would take to make indie games. And so I spent time. I begged Amy. I said, just let me buy a MacBook so that we can like make games. I promise it'll be worth it. And so I took a couple weekends and learned how to make some stuff in Objective-C, and that was kind of a foray back into games. And then I worked for a couple years for a small studio because I'm a programmer. And I think really I always wanted to be a filmmaker. And I think what video games offer is this, this idea that we can make worlds and that we can build those worlds and that we can live in those worlds. And so, for us, there's kind of this discovery through like that Dragon Cancer and the Not Games movement and other things like that, that we really wanted to create worlds where you could have meaningful experiences in them. And that kind of has led to what we do at Numinous, which is create like mostly experimental narrative experiences. Some people call them games. We put Numinous Games in air quotes because we feel like we're kind of maybe not treading new ground, but kind of like going further into what it means to create kind of immersive worlds. And so when we met y'all at Cyan, we were just thrilled because like talk about pioneers. And so it's been a cool experience, just like being part of this community and being able to work with such legends. So.
Well, just so you know, Ryan Morzeka was supposed to be on this panel, but could not for personal reasons. He had something at the same time. But he said, when I first met Ryan Green at South by Southwest, I was taken back by his deep compassion for people. I knew his story, but I didn't really know the person. I walked away from that moment hoping I could work with his team in the future. And then Rand had a similar experience with Ryan and Amy at a conference. You became friends and got to talking. So it seems like right from first meeting, Cyan felt that they really wanted to work with y'all. So I'm really glad that Cyan Ventures could help make AML happen with you.
This AML wouldn't exist without Ryan and his willingness to advocate for us and really, help us. So.
Yeah, just a little bit more background. Amy, can you explain, Ryan mentioned just kind of, you're not quite games. You like to create experiences and kind of blur the lines between what a game dev studio can and should be. Can you talk a little bit about the Playability Initiative and what that is?
Oh, sure. Playability Initiative is an endeavor we've taken on this year to make games for people really like with profound disabilities. So just trying to make hyper accessible games. And so we worked to create a one-button game that you could play with just a single tap of a button. Or if someone were to use a puffer straw or to play with eye tracking, like that all of it could be done with just very simple clicking. And then our goal has been to encourage other studios to think more accessibly. And so on our little community on Facebook, the Playability Initiative community, we last year did a lot of challenges about like, hey, how would you remake Zelda as a one-button game? How could you turn the Spider-Man swinging mechanic into a one-button mechanic? And people would submit just like game design documents about how they could see turning mechanics into one button. And so all of that just to advocate that like, oh, if we're all really thoughtful from the beginning, then we can do more to create really accessible games and think about the players who would benefit from that. And I mean, I think we're growing as a studio in our knowledge. VR is not the most accessible medium, but even within that, you just recognize there's so much more we can all be doing, but a lot of it is just on that, like, if you're aware of it, you think differently. And we always say to make a great game, you have to really consider the player. And so we like to ask ourselves and challenge other studios, like, are we considering all players or just a certain idealized type of player, and how can we do that? So it is definitely something that like we hope in the next few years to build a little bigger, maybe make it an official charity and start to figure out how we can fund more of that, because we only want to make free experiences and games through Playability Initiative, but we're not the best fundraisers in the world. So that'll be step 2, is figuring out how to take that a little bit bigger, because it's near and dear to our heart, because Joel had special needs, and that kind of shifted how we looked at the world. So.
And Joel is the child that we lost to cancer, who we made That Dragon Cancer about.
Yeah, I love that his legacy lives on in everything you're doing. I haven't forgotten about you, Michael. I have a question for you, sir. Your question is, hi, Mike. I miss you guys. So my question for you is, what are some of the perks and pitfalls of working with a team that's mostly fully remote?
Oh, good question. Well, I've worked with remote teams for a long time. It started back in healthcare we had a group out of India that I was working with, and I actually got the privilege to go work with them a few times, which was really cool. India is absolutely amazing. If you ever get a chance to go, do it. But I think a lot of obviously the perks of working remote is building trust with your team. I guess that could also be a pitfall, but I like to think of it more as a perk, because you really do kind of build trust. You know, people tend to, when you're remote, you kind of have the flexibility of working when you need to and when you can, and being able to do that is huge. I feel like I would really struggle to go back to working in an office like every day. I've been doing the remote stuff for almost 10 years now, so it's definitely nice. As a producer, as kind of, leading projects and project managing, you really have to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on and where all the talents are. So you kind of want to play to the strengths of your teammates and what they're great at, and really kind of elevate them to the levels to be super successful. And I like to think that I try to do that. I think those are kind of the perks. Pitfalls are obviously, sometimes it's hard to get a hold of people, just how it is. We've got some teammates that sometimes you just can't ever seem to get a hold of them when you need to. And that's always a challenge, but that kind of falls back into the trust. You trust that they're getting the work done that needs to get done. And deadlines are very important. Trying to put some kind of stakes in the ground for when things need to be done, and that keeps everybody motivated. And then, you really want to try not to crunch. That's pretty much a curse word in development anymore. And so you really try to make sure that you're planning ahead, you're giving your team enough time to do the things they need to do. So really, not too much different than if you were in the office. You just there's just that extra layer of trust that everybody's getting their job done.
Right, that's excellent. Last question before we jump into AML. Ryan, where did the name Numinous Games come from?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Numinous.
I'm not trying to stump you, but
no, I know, but I'm just trying to how to say it. So there's this. I think the concept of the word numinous or numina came from writings of like C.S. Lewis, who was referencing some other philosopher named Otto or something, who talked about numinous, and he described it as this idea that if there was 2 doors, and I told you that behind door number 1 there was a tiger, and you believed it, how would you feel standing in front of that door? And then if I told you behind door number 2 there was a ghost, and you believed it, how would you feel standing in front of that door? And I think that feeling that you would feel with the ghost is they kind of describe as that numinous feeling, right? Like it's that feeling when you're confronted with eternity, when you're confronted with the unknown, the unknowable, when you're on kind of like, face to face with a faceless being, right? Like, and so that's the kind of feelings that we want to seek, at Numinous. We want to seek, kind of that heart of connection with the knowable and the unknowable. That idea of kind of that terror, that sacred terror that you feel, but also that like profound beauty and place in the universe that you feel when confronted with all those things, you know? And so when we contemplate our existence, like those are the kind of things that we want to evoke in our work is, and that, you know, that cascades to everything. It can cascade to making sure that everybody's included, or seeing that everybody is worthy of being seen and being honored, and as well as just seeking the sacred, seeking those things that give our lives meaning and that are meaningful to us.
That was a fantastic answer, which is why I asked, but also leads perfectly into Amy telling us about AML. So tell us about it. Congrats, like I said, on the launch this year. What made you want to do a VR game? And yeah, AML in particular, it's so different. So what led you to that?
Sure. Okay, so AML stands for Area Man Lives. I feel like we always use the shorthand that the studio uses, and then we never like explain. But gosh, we started to be really interested in virtual reality right around the time that Dragon Cancer released. I would say that maybe 6 months to a year before it released, we started to think about the fact that like, oh, this game would have been really good in VR. Like, because that whole game we designed around this idea of presence. It was less about what you were doing so long as you were just present in the space, and just being there is what mattered. Because that was actually true for a lot of our parenting of a child with a terminal illness, that like you always wanted to be doing something, but there was so little that you could really do that would matter or change anything. And so just being there and your presence was the most important part of that journey for us. So in that game, we made it all about presence, and then that was right as this medium started to take form and start to gain momentum, the virtual reality. I mean, of course, we all had, like, I think Ryan had a Virtual Boy as a kid, like the Nintendo Virtual Boy. So, I mean, there have been smatterings of it for a long time, but that was right when things were starting to look like, oh, like virtual reality might become a legitimate medium, like. So that was exciting, and we just thought, oh, like here's a medium that's all about presence, and those are the kinds of stories we want to tell. So we were kind of itching to make a game for virtual reality ever since then. And at the time, Google was taking pitches for games for the Daydream, and we pitched this really cool space game, and they were really excited about this cool space game we pitched. And they were like, yeah, like we want to be part of you making that space game. And then 3 months later, we're like, oh, we totally changed the concept, and now you're at a radio station the whole time. But gosh, Area Man Lives. It's just different from anything else we've ever played. It's bizarre and funny. I don't even like. It's one of those games that I don't even know how to describe it, and so that feels really weird. But
we kind of started with we started with the mechanic of voice, right? So like, we wanted to make a voice-driven game, and at the time, there was technology. Google Cloud Speech was available, and we discovered that we could get pretty accurate results if we used this service. And it was better than anything else that we've seen. So what we were looking for are, what are ways that we can, you know, one of the most natural things you want to do in VR, one of the first things I do when I get in VR and was playing those like pet demos, is I would just like talk to the pet. Like I would pick it up and I'd want to talk to it and all of that. And so the very first natural reaction you have in VR is to speak. And so we wanted to create an experience where you could speak. And then also something that we really love about VR is presence, is that the closest analog we see to VR is not film, but theater. And so for us, we really wanted to lead into the theatrical elements that make VR strong. And so we were looking for a setting that that played into all of those strengths. And so we centered on a radio station.
yeah, and so yeah, one of the primary mechanics of how you interact with the game is to talk out loud. And so then it was just really fun as a writer to like work on writing this game where we're going to respond to whatever you say, not knowing what you might say. And so we always talk about it that it's like a little bit of a magic trick where we kind of go, okay, like if we ask this question, we can presume they might say any number of these things, and so we can write specific responses for what we can presume they might say, and then, you know, but some other responses for like some of those catch-alls where like maybe they go in a path we weren't anticipating. So it's really been a video game that for us feels like playing along with the audience, which is really, really cool. And then, of course, there's like a numinous presence about that game as well. And it kind of unfolds slowly as you play it. So like at first it starts out feeling a lot like a radio simulator. And you're playing as a DJ. It's your first day on the job, a fill-in DJ at a new radio station. And you start getting phone calls from a man who says that he's on a mission and he's been listening to you the whole time. Everything you say, every song you play, he thinks is a clue about what he's supposed to do next, and he wants you to keep leading him on this mission. So then that's kind of where things start to naturally go off the rails as you're trying to figure out exactly how the things you do in the radio station are going to impact the life of your listeners outside of the radio station.
And who plays the voice of that caller, the listener?
The listener we're being guided.
Yeah.
That is Max Greenfield from New Girl.
Right on. Yeah. So tell us,
Can't
Michael.
believe we got him. Like,
I hope you don't mind me calling you Michael all the time, but
no,
tell
it's
us, Mike, who did we get to play? So there are the three leads. I know we have a lot of voices in the game, including yours and the Greens, and I believe at least one of your children, Amy and Ryan. But yeah, who are playing the three lead voices in case anybody hasn't seen the news about this? Because this was super exciting for the team, I know.
Yeah, so we have Max Greenfield is the area man. We have Joel McHale from Community.
Right.
He is playing a character named John. And then we also have our newscaster, who is played by Ronan Farrow.
That's excellent. I love that. And what was it like? I'm not sure who was there in Hollywood land for this, but what was it like working with famous movie stars like Ronan and Joel and Max?
It was just bananas. Like we were just kind of pinching ourselves the entire time. So being able to cast celebrities kind of was something we had never imagined we'd be able to do, but then being able to actually like be in the studio, recording with them, directing them, it was one of the more surreal moments of our lives, because we're just like these game developers from Colorado. Like we are not a big deal. We're this teeny little indie studio, and we were just the whole time like, how are we here? How is this happening? But they were just so incredible to work with. It was like really like watching, like when you watch like a master artist like paint and you're just like, how are they doing this? That's how it felt watching each of them, and they each had their own style and their own way of doing things, but it was really cool. Like whatever direction we gave, they could just adapt and go for it. And always anything they did was like so far beyond our expectations of how good it could be. Like we had versions of our game with scratch audio where it was just like all of us like playing all the roles so we could like play through it, make sure everything worked, and we had all the beats. And like I thought that I had thought through every way a line could be said until we got them in the studio, and we're like, oh, it's like weirdly funnier now, and I don't know how you knew to do it that way. So
talk about Ronan and the teleprompter and his cold reading ability.
Oh yeah. So our newscaster in this game, it is no secret that in Area Man Lives there are a million ways that you can kill the Area Man. 98. Yes, I'm a little bit prone to exaggeration. So you can kill the Area Man 98 different ways, and we have this newscaster who kind of narrates the death for you after you kill him. And those lines tend to be these long paragraphs, which all voice actors always hate because, you know, like you're reading it for the first time, and if it's a small bit, you can kind of get it in your head, but if it's long, it feels like improv no matter what because your brain can't remember that much. And he was so incredible. I mean, granted, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, so that should not have shocked us. But he could read like paragraph blocks of text like he'd read it 100 times. And then, you know how when you're reading sometimes, like you'll skip ahead and accidentally read an adjective from the like next line down, or you'll use the wrong tense on a verb. Like he would do that like anyone would, but he would just like improv the rest of it to make it fit. So if he used one adjective down here he shouldn't have, then when he got to it, he swapped it with the one he missed, like flawlessly. Or if he switched something to like, I don't know, past perfect instead of like just past tense, then he'd switch all the other verbs to match. And it was like really astounding to watch how he, like, just his skills at cold reading.
Yeah, so you can tell, like, my wife's a total nerd about writing, and like, and he was very impressive and very gracious. And they all worked under our incredibly ridiculous constraints of budget, and they just got the work done. So I think Max recorded like a 6-hour session without taking a break. So it was incredible.
Oh, wow.
And that was one really amazing thing is you know
4-hour
that
session, 4 hours.
you know that all these actors can demand like really high rates, and we did not have that to offer. So it was just cool to see them fall in love with a project and be willing to do it because they liked it, like not because it was going to be this big paycheck for them. So we were just always very humbled by the fact that they were willing to be in our game.
So we do have a question from Jeffy Pop, which is a great name. What was there?
That's my brother.
Is it? Yeah. Hi, Jeffy.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for your support.
He wants to know if there were any difficulties working with the celeb voices. Was there anything that you felt was hard about doing that?
They were so incredibly gracious. Like, I just couldn't, I mean, they're just professionals, and they came in and did the work, and there was no ego. They were all like just willing to take direction and like made it very easy.
And I won't even tell you who, but we left. Oh, he has a difficulty, and I can't wait to hear what it is. There was one actor that just because of our timing, like we had sessions back to back, and we left them waiting for an hour. And I was mortified. I was like, oh, this is going to go so poorly. They're going to be so angry. They're going to come in frustrated. This session's going to go awful. I've never seen someone be so cool about having to wait an hour for something to start. Like, just like blew us away how awesome they were. But Mike had a difficulty.
Okay, I kind of lied. It's difficulty, and it was also something that made the project, all the lines and stuff, so much better. Was how much incredible improv that they did. Like, if any of you guys have seen New Girl, and just the way that Max Greenfield delivers lines, that is in this everywhere. Like, when you hear it, you're like, oh my gosh, that is just him through and through, right? And so he would just go off and be like, this thing, and like, okay, and like whatever, and it was a pain in the butt to cut up those lines because they didn't match the script, and I had to rewrite all the script that's in the game, all the closed captioning, all the subtitles. But it was a great problem to have because it made everything so much better.
Right on. I feel like I've been spoiled because I know who you're talking about being the most patient and kind of all. And it's not who you think it's going to be, from what we know of all these people. But it's great to hear that there are just lovely people out there who, even though they're famous, or paid a lot of money, are still down to earth and have good values and good work ethic. And actually, it sounds like they're all huge fans of video games in general. And so that's why they wanted to be part of the project too, which I love.
We can thank Rand and Cyan and Mist for allowing us to work with Ronan Farrow because he's a huge fan.
His mom, Mia, started that. Yeah. Okay, so I had a question that was going to be fun if Ryan Warzeka was here, and that was, have any of you ever seen Ryan Warzeka take a break or sleep or eat? But he's not here, so we don't have to ask that one. I guess for you, Ryan, what are you most proud with Area Man Lives? Now that it's out, what aspects of the experience are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of Amy's writing. This is a project that really allowed Amy to kind of wave her weird flag, like she's just as weird as the rest of us, and and it's just really funny, and people don't expect that from us or our studio, and so I liked that we got to show more of our personality and sense of humor. And so, yeah, it was a big effort. It was just kind of like, there's how many lines? 3,000 probably dialogue lines. We have hours and hours of content and a lot of stuff that nobody will find because Amy's tendency is to write for when you don't play along. So if you ever play it the good way, play it the way we want you to play, and then try playing it not the right way and see what
Try
kind
going
of
off the beaten path.
see the dialogue, because what we really wanted is for this game to not feel like a game. Like, one of the things I don't like about adventure games is that typically when you do like a dialogue tree, you like hit a dialogue tree and then you're like, A, okay, now I have to do B, now I have to do C, now I have to do D, and now I go to the next thing and I do A, B, C, and D again. Like, it's not like an actual flowing conversation. And we took a risk here. We took a risk with Area Man Lives that we do not necessarily signpost when you've done something to change the narrative or the flow of the narrative, right? So you might think that things aren't changing around you, but they actually are changing. Like, us as the coders of the project know that there is a ton of engineering that's gone into this. And so I'm proud of the fact that we made something that's sometimes invisible to players on like where the flow is going, and makes it feel like a real-time drama, which is kind of hard to do. So there's some things that we could have done better, but I think we accomplished our goal in that, and so I'm proud of that.
So you talked about the fact that there are 98 or more or less ways in which you may kill the area man. Chicken Bird Lover, which is another fantastic name, is asking, is it possible to play the game in a way that the area man actually lives? Is this one of those multiple endings games?
Yes. So there are 5.
Oh. Don't say.
I'm just saying that there are.
There is a perfect path.
Okay. Yes. Okay. There are 5 angels. There are no angels. I was gonna just throw out something weird. Okay. There's 5 purple. There's nothing. Okay. So, within the game, it is a situation where there are several endings you can get to, and only one ending is your true ending. We refer to the other endings as the princess is in another castle ending. So you can choose, if you are satisfied with your experience, to stop at any point, but you'll know if you get to kind of the ultimate true ending.
Okay. See, this makes me want to play it about 10 more times
and
right away.
And it is an adventure game technically, right? Because there are things that you're trying to figure out to solve the problems.
And it bears saying, because this probably won't come in a question, that the pace, well, it's a very funny and weird game. The pace is very much like listening to a radio drama. So that's something we did that we think is very different from a lot of video games, is that we've kind of asked people, will you slow down? Will you settle into this experience? Will you just take it in as a story? And that may be one of the things I'm most proud of. And it's just one of those things that it's hard to do, because you kind of know that there's a consumer base for VR who just wants to fight something, drive something, fly something, do something crazy. And we're kind of can we chill together for a little bit? Is that cool? And for some people, just actually no is the answer. No, that's not why I'm here. But we just suspect that there are pockets of people who, while it won't feel natural at first, will really appreciate having this type of experience in VR. And then it's one of those things where we hope that, again, if we do it even moderately well, then other studios may create similar kinds of experiences where VR can be a place that we like to get together and hang out, and not necessarily go for big thrills. Mm-hmm. Not that there's anything wrong with big thrills. I just think now I'm okay, what's second wave of VR look like? What's third wave of VR look like? Where do we start to create some differentiation in the game space?
I'm proud of a game that you can play sitting down, for the record.
You realize this room is one of those pockets, Amy. This room is one of those pockets of players who like to slow down, explore, find the mystery, find the puzzles. You've come to the right place. You're among your people here. We have a question from Philip Shane, and then I'm going to turn it over to the room for Hannah to run around with the microphone if anyone has questions there. But from Philip, he would like to know, do you have another game in the works that you can tell us about yet?
Yes,
I
we
know
are.
of at
We
least.
are working on another VR game that we are calling Moonseed. But that's all I really am going to say about it.
No, no,
You
I
can
want
talk.
you
You
don't
can
have to
talk
use
about.
the microphone.
I don't trust
I
you.
think you
NDA. NDA.
No,
NDA.
I will
let
be
her.
very, very careful. What I will say about Moonseed is it is the gamiest game we've ever been associated with. Like sometimes we demo it and we're like, oh dang, like people might really love playing this. Like that is so just I mean not that
you want to do in VR.
yeah, so it's very mechanic. Like it's not what you would think of from Numinous necessarily. It's just a super crazy fun mechanic in VR that people keep going, "Oh, whoa, like I need to try that again. Oh, that's really cool." So it's sometimes surprises us a little bit cuz we're like, "Huh, we kind of stumbled on something cool." So we're really excited about Moonseed, but it is very much in the early stages of development.
And that's going to be the tagline. You heard it here first. The gamiest game we've ever made. Okay. Um, Hannah, did you want to ask if there are people in the room with questions and run the microphone around? Or I can't see the majority of the room, so I can't tell. Thank you. The lovely Hannah, everyone. Thank you.
Hi. My question was just where can we find or buy this game? Is it on Steam or online?
I can just answer real quick. Oh, they won't hear you without the mic? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Sorry, streamers. Yes, the game is available on Steam, on Viveport, on Quest, on Rift, so pretty much everywhere you get VR
But
content.
it's VR only right now.
And it is VR only, yeah.
Right on.
We have a couple more questions from the room, so I'm going to do a little running. All right.
Thank you.
Hands over.
Sorry, Hannah. You could have people walk up to the mic too. That might be
That would work.
faster.
I haven't had the privilege of playing that Dragon Cancer yet, but since you said that it would be so much more immersive in VR, that sounds like a really good benefit to the game. Have you ever considered redoing the game in VR? Would it be very difficult to modify it in those ways?
That's a fantastic question. Excellent. Hannah's getting her exercise.
So yes, we have considered it. You know, in fact, the first VR project we released was one of the scenes from that Dragon Cancer we ported to the Gear VR, and that was really moving. We did that Dragon Cancer in a series of vignettes, like 14 vignettes, and so there are some scenes that would work better than others. I think the biggest problem would be the cinematography of it, right? Because when you do VR, what you give up is the ability to hold the camera, because if you move the camera on a player, you'll make them sick. And so there are some theatrical things we did by turning the camera one way and changing the environment when people turned back. That would be harder to control. So rather than kind of a redoing it in VR, one thing that we've wanted to do is follow up with our journey, because we made that Dragon Cancer while Joel was still alive and still sick, and we finished it after he had passed away. And so like that whole journey, loss and grief and spirituality and everything else that's so entrenched in that Dragon Cancer has been a journey over the past 8 years since we lost him. And so I think that if we were to do a follow-up to that Dragon Cancer, it would definitely be in VR.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome, just because experiencing any part of life through your eyes greens has been pretty epic. I'm biased.
So with a game like this, you mentioned that there's 98 ways for the area man to die. Do you feel like failure is an integral part of the experience? Do you feel like if you just magically play the game and you get it all right and everything's fine, do you feel like you've missed out? And how do you build a game where you know that there are paths that you want people to experience that aren't the right path?
Wow. That is an epic question. Thank you for that question.
I
It's really good.
So that is a great question. We struggled with this actually quite a bit for a number of different reasons. I think to your first question, failure, I think definitely is an integral part of the game. The way that we've kind of structured it, we kind of anticipated that folks would fail a few times before they really figured it out. And I think that that was a huge part of the way we kind of designed things. But we always had in the back of our heads, like, what if somebody kind of just hits everything on the first try? Which there's a few places where it's a little more obvious than others. There's some places that are much more obscure, and you'd have to be paying attention, and we kind of hope that you are, which is why we kind of ask people to kind of chill out with us and really listen to the narrative, because there's clues in there, there's all kinds of things in there, just in the narrative as you're playing, which, as Myst fans, I hope you would all appreciate that a lot.
For sure.
And yeah, I mean, there's definitely paths that I would be sad if someone never got to like experience. But we also just know that that's the case. Like Ryan all the time would tell me, like, when what's the studio that did all the narrative adventure games? Telltale. Yeah. So Ryan would always tell me, Telltale, like they have those percentage markers where you can see like what percentage of people did what path. He said part of why they do that is so they can put the best content on the most used path. And he's like, you always put your best content on like the least used paths. And I'm like, I know, but I was like, those are the people who might appreciate it the most. Like, there's one terrible joke in there that Ryan's always like really scared someone will find. I was like, the only person who will find that joke is like the person who's being kind of a jerk, and they're going to be so impressed that that joke is there. So like I wrote it for that one guy who's going to do this weird thing, and then he or her really gets this joke, and so like sometimes I think it's that thinking about who's the type of player that's most likely to do this thing, and can I write something that player will appreciate. And I think that's why some of the things that I find more interesting are kind of obscure, because I'm like, oh, then that's special for the person who's going to play in an obscure way, and I kind of have an affinity for that type of player.
It's like you're pulling Easter eggs straight into the game.
Yeah, I mean, what's hard is that I think some people, it's like not being, the difficulty is not being everything to everyone, right? Like, there are some people that would want to come in and have a whole like AI-driven conversation, and this just is not that, right? Like it couldn't be, because we were doing voice acting, and there's a number of technical reasons that we couldn't do that. So we find it more akin to being on an improv show where you got pulled up on stage. And you know how whenever the person that gets pulled up on stage, they start to misbehave, the actors can kind of nudge them and make fun of them and get them back in line, right? But it has to be in good fun. And so I think like when you talk about failure and replay and everything else, it's like you need to be somebody that wants to play along. And if you're playing along, then you'll probably have a good experience.
And I think maybe that's one thing we've had to adjust to a little bit, that like you can know in your head, like, oh, this isn't for everybody. And so the whole time we've known, like, this is a super weird game. It makes you slow down. Like, we're not signposting the key decisions. Like, this game is so not for everyone. And I knew that and was even a little proud of it. And then all the time you'll get a review from someone that you're just like, oh, this game was super not for them. Like just the things they complain about, you're like, oh, that's hard. So maybe this is just encouragement for all of you who like different kinds of experience and different games. Like, I think this process has helped me recognize that, like, oh, I tend to only leave reviews when something's wrong and when something's not working or when I don't like something. And I was like, oh, I should leave more reviews when I'm like, this thing's for me. I love this kind of thing. Because I think it, one, helps other people who like kind of strange, weird things find their stuff. And then two, it's just encouraging, because then for everyone that you're like, oh, this was not for them, there's at least one other voice that's like, oh my gosh, this thing you made is super for me. And then you go, oh good, it's for someone. So that's my teeny plug for reviews, maybe not just for our game, but for of all the things that you like, that you really love out in the world. It does help the developers so much to like hear from the people that it is for, so they don't get too focused on the people it's not for. Because it's one thing maybe about reviews that I worry about is when I look at games and they become so homogenous. I think some of that is because, oh, if you make anything other than what the like massive group wants to see, then the reviews will kill it before anyone can kind of find it. So yeah.
But thank you for the great reviews, because we've had great reviews. So, but to answer that question a little bit deeper on the Numinous side of things, a lot of what AML is about, or Area Man Lives is about kind of like choosing to believe that you matter, and looking at the things that happen to you in your life, and you know, that question of like, there's a lot of we poke fun at it in Area Man Lives, but it's like something happens that only matters to you, you know, like that one bug shows up like on your doorstep, or like that one or there's like a cloud in the sky that's shaped like something meaningful to you, or there's like a sunset and it's just beautiful, or a rainbow, or any of these things that we take as like omens of good fortune or meaning, or feeling seen, right? And in the midst of Area Man Lives, there's like things that are meaningful and things that aren't meaningful, and choosing to find meaning in them, and choosing hopefulness in the midst of failure. You know, like, you know, even if you fail, did you still do what you were supposed to do, what you were being guided by some invisible hand to do? Does that invisible hand exist? Who knows? But if it does, like, that's great. If it doesn't, where else can you find meaning, right? So that's like what the narrative is about. So yes, I would say that failure is a big part of it, because it's about kind of choosing hope in the midst of failure.
It's the butterfly effect, yes? A little bit?
Yeah, that kind of thing, yeah.
How are we for questions? Does anyone else have a question?
I see one more hand from the room.
Yay.
This is more a question about game development in general, but like, how do you get testers with different personalities? Like, you can, like you were talking about, like, you have to be a jerk to get this ending. How would you get someone with that personality?
You just post on Craigslist looking for jerks to test our game.
Yeah, so we have a question. We have a Google Doc, a questionnaire. Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely difficult. I mean, our QA team, when we first started, the Cyan QA team came in and helped us, and they were pretty adamant that they would go in blind to begin with, and so we just kind of saw what unfolded, right? And for the most part, they hit a lot of the main places. There were a few folks that kind of went off on different paths, but then eventually we had to kind of give them the narrative tree so that they could legit test everything. So in the end, that wasn't that hard. User testing, I'll give it over to Amy here in a second, but user testing is something that we did pretty big too, where we just had lots of different people. You know, we gave them like $50 and said, hey, you want to test the game? And, you know, let's go. And so they would sit there for a few hours, so some longer than others, depending on how long they were interested and how far they got. And so we kind of had a two-pronged approach there.
One example. Oh, sorry, Katie.
I was just going to say, sorry, Ryan, you also at PAX East and other shows where you took the game, you did a lot of, I remember when you put the VR headset on me and just gave me nothing at all. And unless I asked a question, you just were very observant what I would do and when, and you were keen to know why I was making the choices I was making. So I just remember you being intensely observant for anyone that ever played, whether they were testers, legit testers or not. So
one of the biggest indicators to us on whether somebody was enjoying it was their body language. And like, it was amazing. You can sometimes see that body language in headset. Like, I was watching a screen recording in headset, and I noticed that the headset was bouncing like this during like long periods of dialogue. And I noticed that the guy was shaking his leg because he was like frustrated and bored, right? So it's those kind of things, like, and being able to see people in person is great. Like at PAX, we found some people that were getting really into it. We found other people that got really embarrassed, and you could tell because we were asking them to speak out loud with their eyes blindfolded, right, in public, right? So how many of you would like to be blindfolded and speak in public while playing a game? Probably not very many of you, right? So I think there is, that aspect of personal comfort of like, not everybody wants to be in an improv game. If they do, then they probably want to do it privately, right? So those are ways where we just had to kind of like look at ways where we could pull back. If it was too embarrassing, look at ways that we could nudge a little bit further. And so definitely people's personalities and feelings, like you're messing with somebody's personal space in VR, right? And so you have to be careful and mindful of those things.
Just to add really quick, we are notorious for making people feel uncomfortable at conferences. So that Dragon Cancer, we had Kleenex boxes next to every station, and then with this game, obviously, the nervousness.
That's a great thing to be known for. We will make you feel intense awkwardness. Are there any other questions in the room, Hannah?
Yep, I see one more.
Okay, awesome. We have 3 minutes. And then we all turn into pumpkins.
So I know that you guys talked about how the game was like a totally different game in the beginning and then just changed. What inspired that change and what was that process like switching gears?
Good question. It was even called something else, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Originally, it was called Untethered, and so there was a version of this game on Daydream, and Untethered was the space game name. And then we changed the whole concept, but just kept the name Untethered for whatever reason. So when we got the chance to reboot it and change some things and borrow the minds of Rand and some other people from Cyan and kind of think about puzzles in an interesting way, it was really fun to get to rename the game. But let's see, what prompted the change? The change, yeah. So part of the change was that what was most important to us was to explore, like, what's a story that we could tell mostly through speech detection, like speaking and being listened to, and a game that would be very audio focused. And we wanted to keep the player in one area. So those were kind of, we had set these like limits for ourselves. And we're like, okay, what are really cool places where speaking matters and lots is going on, but you're staying in one place? So originally with the space game, the idea was that you were in like a command center and you were talking to like astronauts in space. So you were hearing everything that was happening. They were relying on you to speak to them. And so we were going with that, but then we were also thinking through, okay, are there other scenarios? We thought about having kind of a vignette-based game at that time. So we were thinking through, okay, what's 3 or 4 other places and areas where you'd be kind of in one space, but the things you were saying really mattered. And when we landed on a radio station, we just loved it so much. And like the things we started to branch out with from there became so interesting that we were like, all right, space is cool, but other studios are doing fine on space. Like someone will cover that territory. We're good. Let's do the weird radio station thing. And so that was the story that kind of just came to life for us. So that's the story we followed.
That was a great question. We're at the end of our time, but before we go, I just wanted to read one final thing from Ryan Morzeka, who you guys know as Grey Dragon. He said, "We are thankful for the team at Numinous and City Lights. Area Man Lives is better than we ever expected. The cast and the humor really just knocked the title out of the park, and Cyan are grateful to be a part of it." So thank you to Amy.
Ryan.
Thank you, Amy and Ryan and Mike, for being here, for coming to be here in person, and for letting me moderate, and for making great games that touch the lives of anyone who plays them. We really appreciate you.